Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 2010 Oppenheimer Lecture. We are delighted that this year, the family that so generously has given its name to this series of IISS lectures is so well represented here today. Thank you, Nikki and Jonathan Oppenheimer, for joining us on this occasion and for your continued support to informed public debate on Africa and its relationship to the wider world. This institute is devoted to ensuring that regional perspectives on regional issues mingle productively with the considered views of outsiders, and that as a result, international understanding is advanced. The Oppenheimer Lecture was established at the IISS to give a voice to leading Africans to provide their reflections on questions of governance and conflict on the African continent. It is worth noting that the first Oppenheimer Lecture was delivered by Liberia's President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, representing a country that has suffered much in the past from internal violence and has had to rebuild a fractured nation. President Paul Kagame of Rwanda has also had to grapple with reviving a heavily wounded nation. It is excellent that he agreed to be our Oppenheimer lecturer this year and to deliver his remarks to us so soon after winning a further term as president, and at a time when there is so much interest in the affairs of the region, as well as a good deal of debate about how best to understand Rwanda's domestic politics and its regional role. Our guest today has played an enormous role in advancing education, healthcare, women's rights, and the knowledge economy in Rwanda. He has had to grapple with the sensitive balances to be struck between political and economic development and the special problems of nation building in an ethnically charged political environment. Though Rwanda has been a great recipient of foreign aid, President Kagame has worked to advance the principle of self-reliance as a proper eventual byproduct of such economic assistance. His views on these issues carry weight. President Kagame, the people who have gathered in this room have come to hear you, not me. I thank you for accepting our invitation and welcome you to the International Institute for Strategic Studies to deliver the 2010 ISS Oppenheimer Lecture. Thank you, sir.
Chairman of the International Institute for Strategic Studies, Ms. Frere de Villiers, Director General and Chief Executive of the International Institute for Strategic Studies, Dr. Chipman, Mr. Nick Oppenheimer, sponsor of this lecture series, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure to be here at the International Institute for Strategic Studies, and an honor to speak on the challenges of nation building in Africa with a special focus on our country, Rwanda. This is a topic that is pertinent to us in Africa, but it is equally important for developed countries since nation building is a continual process. Let me start by expounding on what, in my view, constitutes nation building in general before I move on to discuss what nation building has entailed in Africa and in my country. Nation building is a long and challenging political process, but one that leaders, together with the citizenry, must undertake with seriousness. We must understand that most nations have their unique circumstances, and each one throughout history has built and developed itself around certain distinguishing core features. The first of these has always been the conscious cultivation of a national identity, the sense of belonging based on shared values, tradition, history, and aspirations. National identity is the foundation of social cohesion. The second is the establishment of institutions and laws of governance, which formalize the relationship between the leaders and the citizens and the expectation of service delivery. The third feature is the participation of citizens in the governance process by choosing a system that serves them best, electing or selecting their leaders and playing an active role in decision making. Then there is economic transformation. It is only right for the people to expect a qualitative improvement in their lives. Part of nation building, therefore, includes establishing the climate and mechanisms for economic development for the whole nation. It is worth mentioning that the process of nation building can only be internally generated and led. It cannot be achieved from the outside, however well-meaning. This does not mean that we can't learn from outside or that we do not appreciate support for our initiatives. For a country coming out of conflict, the first priority should be one of stabilization and security, which requires strong internal political leadership, systems, and institutions. In essence, this is a precondition for successful nation building. There is need for restoration of order, peace, and stability for this to happen. All these features must be conceived and implemented within a broad vision of the nation. Distinguished audience, for over 60 years of post-colonial rule, nation building in most African countries has been an uphill task as a result of the disruption and fragmentation of our societies caused by colonization. There is no doubt that colonialism created some conditions that made it difficult for newly independent African countries to function as proper nation states, and the ramifications are still felt today. However, this cannot absolve the failures and weaknesses of some post-colonial African governments who have tended to indulge in a blame game. That's not helpful. The fact of the matter is that we cannot shy away from the heavy responsibility we bear of managing our own affairs and leading our people. Today, the Africans and African leaders are challenged to alleviate poverty and ignorance and to bridge the technological gap necessary for sustainable development. Where this responsibility is not taken seriously, you see weak states and you see failure in nation building. Africans also inherited weak administrative structures, inappropriate and not tailored to the needs of our countries. I won't dwell much on the Cold War and the competition for influence that engendered proxy wars, which caused instability and slowed the process of nation building. Those who were behind this were doing it for the sole purpose of satisfying their own interests. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I would now like to share with you our experience in Rwanda, which has had its share of challenges regarding nation building. Our history in the 30 years following independence was marked by the near absence of characteristics of a functioning state, working in the interests of all its citizens. From independence in 1962 up to 1994, Rwandan governments based their legitimacy on a fundamentally flawed premise of exclusion. These governments destroyed the identity and unity on which the Rwandan nation had been founded, and exclusion became institutionalized. The conditions of conflict and destruction were made possible by this type of leadership, which championed division and sectarianism. Because of this fundamental deficiency, when faced with the challenges of legitimacy, this leadership fell back on their ideology they were familiar with, the so-called ethnic identities, which in effect undermined everything Rwanda was supposed to be. There were other attendant weaknesses. The politics of exclusion inevitably leads to loss of legitimacy, which meant that governance was exercised through coercion rather than consensus or consent. National resources were then diverted to keep this coercive machine in place. Corruption was used to maintain a semblance of effectiveness, and the valuable resources were powered into the preferred regions where the leaders came from. A preoccupation with remaining in power and meeting the demands of a sectarian constituency did not allow for the investment of meager resources in education, technology, and business that were needed for socio-economic transformation. This state of affairs had two related consequences. First, the economic stagnation and levels of poverty remained high. Second, it led to heavy dependence on foreign aid that had devastating consequences on the development of the country. It led the people to believe that they could rely on perpetual handouts from donors for their livelihood and therefore need not work hard. Most of the donor funds remained in the wrong hands and to a great extent served to entrench this corrupt leadership. But equally, these funds gave donors an undue political influence in our domestic affairs. It is instructive that Rwanda's budget before 1994 was financed almost 100% by external funding. Today, external support of the national budget is less than 50%. The loss of legitimacy by post-colonial governments and the necessity to prop them up by the undemocratic means had other consequences that militated against effective nation building. Leaders were not accountable to the citizens, but rather to their foreign benefactors. It also led to increased repression and exclusion. The tragic consequence of all this was the genocide in 1994. Informed by the failure of past governments, the government of Rwanda has since 1994 approached the challenges of nation building in a different way. We have adopted and implemented policies that foster national unity, promote reconciliation, peace and security, and development. We have set out to build a nation of laws and institutions. The first step was to correct a historical wrong and institute inclusive politics. The Rwandan people learned the hard way the danger of politics of exclusion where the winner takes all, and have opted for a model that builds on inclusive politics of power sharing and consensus building. At our stage of development, we recognize the important role of the state in service delivery and as an enabler of economic productivity. In order to make this effective, it was necessary to build strong institutions of governance at different levels of government and at the same time decentralize authority and decision-making so that ordinary people's voices are heard and so that decisions of government reflect their priority needs and inputs. It is also clear to us that for effective service delivery, accountability and transparency are key. In dealing with some of these underlying challenges to the unity of our country, we realize that the most effective remedies come from our own historical experiences. And so, when faced with a huge and divisive problem of millions of genocide suspects and an equally large number of genocide survivors living in the same country and in many cases the same neighborhoods, we referred to our culture and came up with a workable solution. We chose a multidimensional view of the problem: justice, reconciliation, healing, and forgiveness, and sought a system that would enable us to move forward. Through Gacaca courts, Rwandans were able to administer a difficult but necessary restorative justice in spite of opposition from many quarters. Another major objective of our government has been the socio-economic transformation of our country. Governments exist to enable their people to lead reasonably good lives. This requires policies and mechanisms that facilitate increased production, more trade, and attract investments. African countries, and Rwanda in particular, recognize that we will develop if we enhance trade among African countries and beyond, and have free access to international markets, trading in high-value products. It is imperative, therefore, to establish good relations among nations on the basis of mutual respect. African governments should eventually aim to wean ourselves off aid as important component of our development effort. This does not mean that we do not recognize the value of aid, as some people tend to confuse the argument. Is there bad aid? Yes, there is, depending on how it is looked at and what it does. Is there good aid? Yes, there is, depending again on what it does and how you look at it. So rather, aid should be used to create conditions which will make it possible for us to live beyond it. Because aid should not be an end in itself, nor is it a substitute for business, innovation, and hard work. Aid that does not defeat poverty creates perpetual dependency, which in turn deprives Africans of our dignity and self-esteem. In conclusion, let me say that nation building is like building a house. You start with a foundation before you build the structure. The foundation comprises security, peace, and stability. But let me also reiterate that while acknowledging the value of external support and partnership, nation building cannot be dictated from outside. It should reflect and be informed by the history and particular circumstances of the country. And so, a nation that cannot find homegrown and innovative solutions from within itself to the numerous challenges of survival and growth is doomed to failure, no matter how much support that country gets from external sources. It is with this in mind that Rwandans have sought to solve the numerous challenges we have met by drawing from our history, culture, and experience, as well as drawing support and learning from others. I thank you for your kind attention and welcome, and I welcome your questions and observations. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, thank you very much for delivering the Oppenheimer Lecture and for giving us your definition of nation building and your attitude towards questions of foreign aid, as well as to many other questions. The President's remarks were on the record, and in the conversation we're about to have, both parties should understand that it's also on the record. So I invite people to seek the floor. When I recognize you, if you could stand up so that the microphone can recognize you as well, and then if I haven't identified you, identify yourself before asking your question. First was Lindsay Hilson. Lindsay, if you stand up. There is. Thank you.
Thank you. Lindsay Hilson, Channel 4 News. Mr. President, you are widely respected internationally for the development which your government has brought to Rwanda. But there are questions being asked at the moment, specifically in this UN report, about the behavior of your troops in the Democratic Republic of Congo, in Zaire, from 96 to 98 and onwards. And in this forthcoming UN report, it says that your troops may have committed genocide. Can you tell us your reaction to that and whether you feel that this damages your legitimacy? Thank you.
I don't imagine that my legitimacy is something that would just be washed away by such allegations. First of all, because they are baseless and total and true and flawed in many ways, right from the authors of the report to the methods used and to the fact that UN itself, unfortunately for some of us, UN that or whose legitimacy in terms of how it operates should be questioned is the one questioning the legitimacy of those whose legitimacy should not be questioned. Because if there was anything to be questioned about, anything that could have gone wrong either in the Congo or in the Great Lakes region or particularly in Rwanda, it should have been the UN to really be held accountable for that. And I'm sure you are aware of that. The other part is the problems of Congo. In addition, I will not talk much about my problems in this particular question, I mean of Rwanda. Problems of Congo and relating to the UN are much older than me. They have existed for close to 60 years. So, and I don't think either me or any Rwandan is really responsible for the problems of Congo or the problems of UN with and in the Congo. But we would have to deal with this issue anyway, and we've started dealing with that. And the countries that have been mentioned in the report are working together with the UN to find where to place the problems they referred to and how to go beyond that and focus on better things that need to be done in the region, in Congo, in Rwanda, and beyond. But of course, that leaves the question of the motive of the authors and the whole purpose of the report and the timing of it and the undue emphasis that was put on it, which again it leaves that unanswered. But these are the questions we will also be raising in the process of understanding what is real at issue. But to accuse Rwandan forces or Rwanda of committing genocide in the Congo or anywhere for that matter other than what happened in our own country is just absurd, and probably to say that people feel insulted and are very angry is an understatement.
Yes, if you stand up, yes, with the glasses, but you need to stand up, and that way the microphone will find you. Thank you.
Hi, it's Amy Kellogg from Fox News. President Kagame, I understand that Rwanda has shot up the list of countries that have a favorable environment for investment. And I'm wondering if you can give me a sense of what sort of American investment is happening right now in Rwanda. Thank you.
Yeah, there are quite a number of investments. One particular one is in the area of energy. We are seeking to produce energy from the vast reserves we have of methane gas at the border between Rwanda and Congo. And there's an American company, or there are American companies that are investing in that area of transforming this gas into the electricity that we need, not only in our country, but in the region as well. Other companies have invested in tourism and different service areas, including investment in the IT, a number of IT companies that have come up in Rwanda that have come from the United States. These are key areas, but there are more than that.
The next question from Lord Malloch Brown, formerly of the United Nations and also of the Foreign Commonwealth Office.
Thanks, John. Mr. President, 18 months ago, you began a process of improving diplomatic and security links with President Kabila in the DRC, and there were some early gains from that in terms of reduced militia activities on all sides. Are those gains going to continue, and do you see the prospect of collaboration on the sort of economic development of Eastern Congo between your two countries?
Okay. Yes, in fact, by the way, while this sounds a very good development for our two countries, Congo and Rwanda and the region, it might have also been one reason why such a report came up. Because while it is good and everybody seems to acknowledge it is very good, other people feel threatened by it and want to undermine it by, it's like, oh, if Rwanda and Congo come together, then what? You know, there are people whose jobs are threatened by that, and they quickly, so it is a part of it. But back to your point, yes, we have tremendously improved the our relationship between DRC and Rwanda, and it is still ongoing. And in fact, we have earmarked different areas of cooperation. We started with that of security, where we worked together, even in joint military operations in the Eastern Congo. But beyond that, we have continued to work together to see how to resolve those problems that have been in the Eastern Congo for a long time. We continue, and many times our ministers and leaders of different institutions meet and to continue working on improving our relationship. We have also found areas of cooperation, even in the economic area. In fact, in this investment I was talking about, to exploit the gas, methane gas for electricity, we have come together to make this kind of joint investment in exploiting the methane gas. So we are looking at all aspects of cooperation that will enhance the broader stability and security that we could obtain from that cooperation. So it's something that has been very helpful, and already the dividends are there to see on both sides, and we want to keep going on with that.
Thank you very much. And next, the editor of the Africa Confidential, if you come up to the front row. I see the others, and we'll come to... Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. President, you've been in the past very critical of the Arusha tribunal process and its failure to bring justice and its ever larger consumption of public resources in the process of that. I wondered what your view of the International Criminal Court is at the moment, specifically its charges against the President of Sudan for genocide and crimes against humanity, and of course the recent invitation of Mr. el-Bashir to Kenya for the inauguration of the democratic constitution of Kenya. Would, for example, you be prepared to invite President Bashir to Kigali or not?
In fact, it's that it is too late. I don't know why I didn't invite him for my inauguration, but I didn't anyway. But I think let me go to the point. I think there is confusing issues here in my view. Whether so-and-so is guilty of this or is doing that, whether it's about Bashir or about anybody, for me that's not yet what I'm talking about. And in fact, our view to ICC has not been or has not had anything to do with Bashir. No, it has to do with the whole background and concept of ICC and how it works or is likely to work in the future. And it brings in many other cases. You know the case that already is at the UN supposed to be discussed even at the General Assembly of the UN about universal jurisdiction that brings in Rwanda and other African countries, how they suffer under, you have on one hand what you call international law, but in the end it serves only a few against the many. You find, or rather it focuses on some and does not touch the others. And this is an issue of equity, an issue of fairness if you want to dispense justice and do that internationally. This is where the problem lies. It has nothing to do with the particular case like that of Bashir, which we are talking about, or the other one, guilty or not guilty of anything. For us, it's not that. And therefore, even for Kenya, I think my advice to Kenya would have been, and still is, they should not succumb to any pressure. If they did it from the sovereign right perspective and had a reason, because, for example, Kenya argued that it is directly involved with the problems of Sudan in terms of trying to support the solutions being looked for in Sudan, and which impact on them very heavily and in many cases negatively, whether it is to do with southern Sudan and the north and how they come together and the impending referendum and so on and so forth. Kenya has been very central to this. And inevitably, I think it has had to work with all sides concerned with the problems of Sudan. That's what they have said, and I have no reason not to believe them. I think that's why they did invite the Sudanese president. So I have criticized ICTR, true, and the reasons you have said. It has spent billions of dollars, and you know very well it has tried on about probably 50 cases or so. And in Rwanda, through this Gacaca court system, we have tried and processed and reintegrated hundreds of thousands of Rwandans. And I don't think we consumed even a fraction of that amount. But that's a different issue. So ICC, my take on that is the discussions that are ongoing or that have been going on need to address how justice internationally is dispensed. Is it justice for the rich and the developed world that would have the authority to dispense justice to the poor and the developing countries, and that's it, or the reverse is true? So that's where the problem lies for me. That's where the discussion is. it's not Bashir, it's not that. And so far, even the conduct of its activities has not assured me that actually that is not the case, that there is a question that needs to be debated.
Thanks very much. Yes, we've got time for about 3 more questions. The gentleman right in the back, yes, if you could stand up and give us your name.
Thank you. Henry Bonsu from Vox Africa Television and Colourful Radio. Mr. President, very good to see you. I was wondering what you make of the doctrine of liberal intervention as outlined by Tony Blair in his famous Chicago speech in 2002, underpinning the interventions in Sierra Leone and Kosovo and 1 or 2 other maybe more controversial ones. He's considered to be a great friend of Rwanda, and I'm wondering whether or not you believe in that doctrine and would like to see
The doctrine of
liberal intervention. So when you think a country is in crisis, you from outside come in and turn things around, as in Sierra Leone or in Kosovo. And I'm wondering if you would like to see that happening through whatever instrument, through ECOMOG or SADC or the East African Community in Africa for the ongoing problems there.
You'll find that I did touch some of that in my speech. Intervention and the formula for that will depend very much on what is happening, where, and what is underlying that conflict. So sometimes if we could, let me put it this way, if we could have, and that's why maybe it is happening in Africa, we have tried to organize capacities regionally, in a regional sense, where regions could build a capacity to make interventions in their own geographical space if it ever came to that. That's why you have regional brigades of armies being formed either by SADC, the Southern African countries, Eastern Africa, West, and so on and so forth. So that our African regions could, or sub-regions could intervene on behalf of Africa in finding solutions to where there are such a conflict. Whether that can get, and maybe there will always be need for support to boost the capacity of such armies that would, say, intervene in a conflict. But if they could do it on their own, so much the better. Or if they could do it on behalf and being supported by either the UN or other people with certain capacities, still that would be welcome. But you have different conflicts or conflict areas that, or in most cases, actually they need direct intervention. If people having problems cannot resolve them on their own, it's always imperative that some intervention of some kind take place. Because in the end, if just left like that, sometimes the conflicts degenerate and spill over different areas where they were not. So about the doctrine espoused by which government or which leader, that's not really my area of comment. I just leave it in that general perspective that there is a need, in my view, sometimes for interventions to happen. And to happen how is another important question. And who gets involved and for what. Those are issues that need to be looked at. There are some interventions that have been made that are right and legitimate, and especially when they have led to stability and emergence of a solution to the problem, so be it. There are others that have only complicated situation is even further than they were. So all those can be judged from the outcomes and the processes that have led to that.
Gentleman in the white shirt, please, if you could stand up. Thank you very much, and just give us your name and your affiliation.
Yeah, my name is John from the Economist Intelligence Unit, formerly with the Rwandan Ministry of Finance. Thank you very much, Mr. President, for your speech. I was just wondering what you see as Rwanda's role within the East African community, sir.
Our role is, first of all, and that we have covered, to be part of the East African community. The second is to make sure that we contribute together with others in the East African community to make this regional integration a reality. It stops being just a dream that people have had for a long time, but to make it a reality. But again, it's only a contribution we can make. We cannot decide for others how they approach it. But as I see it in the East African community, we are coming together and forging ahead with the serious integration process. So our role is to make sure that we do everything possible from our side to make it a success.
Nicholas McLean. You stand up. Nicholas, yeah. Come right up here.
Mr. President, to what extent do you see the threat of climate change as a problem for Rwanda, and what is your government doing to alleviate that risk?
I think climate change, as we are told by science and others, is real and is global. So Rwanda can play, however modest a role. It needs to play that and contribute to others. So climate change affects a number of things, including the critical ones, say in Rwanda and in Africa. It challenges our food security and many other things, and especially in areas where there are not sufficient resources. I think the results of climate change are even felt more than elsewhere. So we do a small part in our area, whether it is in reforestation or keeping our environment clean, doing away with and reducing carbon emissions in all ways. In a small way, if you reach Rwanda, you don't find plastic bags. It's part of that. And it challenges us to find alternatives for what was being served by that, and so on and so forth. So we do our part in a small way, in a small space, but we know it has spillovers to other areas as well.
There are 11 people who want to ask questions by my count. Only 2 will be able to get themselves in. So I'll ask first this gentleman here and keep the last as a mystery. But no, further behind. Sorry. Yes, you, sir.
Thank you very much. My name is Tom Porteous. I'm the UK Director of Human Rights Watch. Thank you for your speech, President Kagame. You just have been re-elected by 93% of the vote. I just wondered what plans you have over the coming years to use that mandate to expand political space in Rwanda so that future elections can take place where in an atmosphere of genuine political competition and debate. Thank you.
Well, I would start maybe by continuing our dialogue with the Human Rights Watch, which has expertise in matters of freedoms and elections, and may have a lot to educate people about their freedoms. But I think the result of elections in Rwanda were more to actually due to exercising the freedoms by Rwandans rather than the lack of freedom to do that. As Human Rights Watch would want people to believe. But I also want to say we probably need freedom from Human Rights Watch. Because Human Rights Watch has become, when it comes to Rwanda, the matter becomes personal. Yes, I give example. I remember when they unfortunately lost one of their colleagues who used to work in Rwanda for many years, one called Alison Deforge. Somebody on CNN is supposed to be, eulogizing this good person. Instead of talking about that, spent 3/4 of his time talking about me and Rwanda. So if you give us freedom, we will certainly be more free than maybe we have been. But Rwandans have no problems of freedom. They say it, and it is important that you respect them and respect their opinion as well.
Thank you. And the gentleman who stood up before, I'll try to sneak one more in, but the President does have a tight schedule, and so I'm partly in his hands and that of his party.
Oh, okay, fine. It's Dr. Graham Bell's SRU London International Relations. I wonder if you can help me out with a question that my students have often asked me.
What?
And that is, if you could help me out with a question that my students have often asked me, and that is the division between the Tutsi and Hutu in Rwanda. Was that there all the time, or was it created by the Belgians as a divide and rule policy?
Thank you.
Thank you. As we read in history, for our history for many years, Rwanda has been a nation state for centuries. We never had a problem called or relating or coming out of Rwanda having Hutus, Tutsis, Twas. No. There are no wars recorded. There is no conflict anywhere about it. So until the Belgians came. And by the way, on this, I also want to say in Rwanda, actually, we have one culture. These so-called ethnic groups, Hutus, Twas, Tutsis, have one culture. We have one language. We have one culture. We eat the same food. We live on the same villages. There have been, the marriages don't, they have no borders. So this is how it was for many years, until later on in 1930s, this issue developed when colonialists actually introduced even later on identity cards and singling out that this one is Hutu, Tutsi, Twa, and therefore they would be treated differently, whether in terms of jobs or different opportunities. And it was simply created, made up. It did not exist. History says it. It's a fact that can be cross-checked. So, and of course, we have suffered the consequence of that, and that's why we are working towards unity again. But even the colonialists tried to prove it scientifically, that these people are different, but they didn't come to anywhere to prove that actually these people genetically or otherwise were different. But what divided, let me quickly say what actually these differences are about. The Tutsis were said to be cultural keepers. The Hutus, they were tilling land, they were farmers and growing food, agriculture. The Twas were mainly specialized in making pottery, crafts. They are craftsmen and women. So the occupation is what differentiated them. And that was about it. But then later on it was politicized. And politicized so badly that even if they were anyway different, to the extent that they were different tribes or ethnic groups, why would there have been a mission to radicalize that and friend, therefore you should hate each other? See, this is the question. Let's even assume, let's work from a different perspective, that actually these are different groups, tribes or ethnic, and so on. What is the purpose of wanting to say or teaching them that since they are different, they are also dangerous to each other or should be dangerous to each other? This is how now politics came in, and certainly a lot to blame on that past.
Mr. President, even more than 9 people now want to take the floor, so you've obviously excited a huge amount of interest in Rwanda and in the affairs of the region from your formal remarks. I apologize to those who haven't been able to ask a question, but I hope that you will all join me in thanking very warmly the President of Rwanda for his Oppenheimer Lecture this year.